The sky was an unrelenting shade of black, as though the very heavens had swallowed the last remnants of light. A storm raged above, clouds clashing like ancient gods at war. The winds screamed in fury, thrashing the trees with such violence that they bent and groaned in submission. At the edge of a jagged cliff, Ravi Mehra stood, gazing down at the sprawling, shadow-drenched mansion below, GIPSY'S ACRE. The mansion, a crumbling silhouette against the storm's fury, seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions, its dark, ivy-clad walls hiding centuries of secrets. There was no sign of life within, yet something in the stillness felt alive, something waiting. Ravi's heart pounded in his chest, his fingers gripping the damp stone of the cliff's edge. The inheritance had come suddenly, an unexpected gift from an unknown relative whose name he'd never heard. The papers had promised wealth, freedom, a new beginning. But standing there, alone in the raging storm, something gnawed at him. The mansion felt as if it had been watching him all along, waiting for him to arrive. He could hear the voice of the village elder echoing in his mind, that same voice that had warned him a week ago when the legal papers had first arrived. Some things are better left untouched. A cold shiver crawled down his spine as he replayed the words. The old man had looked at him with eyes so heavy with sorrow that Ravi had wondered if he was speaking from experience or from fear. The winds howled louder, as though the very earth was trying to warn him again. The trees bent unnaturally, and in the distance he could have sworn he saw something moving in the mansion's dark windows, but the moment he blinked, it was gone. Ravi tried to shake it off. He had always been a man of logic, a man who believed in the tangible, the real. There were no ghosts, no curses, no haunted mansions. GIPSY'S ACRE was nothing more than a run-down property, a challenge for a man with ambition, and that was exactly who he was. He'd build something here, something lasting. A home for him and his soon-to-be wife, Maya. Together they would create their dream. Still, the air around him felt thick, oppressive. The hairs on his neck stood on end, as if something was watching him from the shadows of the mansion. He forced himself to look away and took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. The storm didn't help. The thunder cracked, shaking the ground beneath him. He closed his eyes, imagining the life he and Maya would have here. A fresh start. The land would be theirs to cultivate, the mansion theirs to restore. They could do it together. But deep inside, a question lingered. What was it that had driven the previous owner to leave this place to someone like him? A sudden gust of wind tore at his jacket, and his gaze snapped back to the mansion. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, he thought he saw a figure standing at one of the upper windows, watching him. But when he blinked again, it was gone. Just the wind, Ravi thought, trying to rationalize it, but the unease in his chest wouldn't subside. He took a step back from the cliff's edge, his thoughts racing. Was this place really cursed? Was it all just superstition? The village elder's words echoed in his mind again. Some things are better left untouched. But Ravi's resolve only hardened. He wasn't one to run from challenges. No, he would face whatever this place had to offer. A distant rumble of thunder broke through his thoughts, and then just as suddenly, a strange silence enveloped the air. No wind, no sound. Just the creaking of the mansion's ancient structure, as if it too was waiting for him to make his move. Ravi exhaled slowly, turning his back to the cliff. He had made his decision. He would not turn back. He would face whatever darkness the mansion held. Because if there was one thing he knew, it was that he couldn't leave now. Not with Maya waiting for him. Not with a future at stake. As he started walking away from the cliff, a single soft whisper seemed to reach his ear so faint, he could barely make it out above the storm's roar. "You've made a terrible mistake, Ravi." His heart lurched. He spun around, but the mansion was as silent and empty as before. But the chill that now gripped him was no illusion. His heart lurched. He spun around, but the mansion was as silent and empty as before. But the chill that now gripped him was no illusion. Cliffhanger ending. The winds howled louder as Ravi walked away, his pulse racing. Something wasn't right. The mansion, the land, it was all wrong. But before he could process what was happening, his phone buzzed in his pocket. A single message blinked on the screen. "Welcome to GIPSY'S ACRE. The nightmare has only just begun." The investigation begins. The first signs of trouble. The mansion was quieter now, the storm having finally passed, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Ravi and Maya stood together in the grand hallway, the sound of their footsteps echoing off the cold stone walls. The house was enormous, its rooms stretching endlessly in all directions, and yet it felt empty. Their footsteps seemed to reverberate too loudly, as if the mansion itself was echoing back their uncertainty. Maya brushed a strand of hair from her face and glanced nervously around. She'd always dreamed of living in a place like this, spacious, full of history, a blank canvas to create something beautiful. But now, standing in the mansion's shadowed interior, the dream felt far more distant. It was as though the walls themselves were watching them, waiting for them to falter. Ravi noticed her unease. "It's just the size of the place. We'll get used to it," he said, trying to sound confident. His voice was steady, but the tightness in his chest betrayed him. They had decided to take on the renovations themselves, transforming the mansion into their dream home. The creaking floors and dust-choked air seemed to protest every step they took, as though the house had no intention of being changed. But Ravi, ever the optimist, refused to let the place intimidate him. "I'll start with the basement tomorrow," he said, looking at a tattered blueprint of the house he'd found in the study. "We'll begin by clearing out all the old junk." Maya nodded but didn't respond, her gaze drifting to the hallway's dark corners. There was something unsettling about the way the light flickered in the old house, casting long, twisted shadows on the walls. As the days passed, the renovations began in earnest, but so did the strange occurrences. At first, it was subtle, a chill in the air that couldn't be explained, even when the windows were tightly shut. The faint sound of footsteps, soft, like the padding of bare feet, would echo from somewhere far within the house in the dead of night. Ravi shrugged it off. "It's an old house," he told himself. "Settling noises, drafts, things like that happen all the time." But Maya wasn't so sure. She would sit up late at night, listening to the creaking sounds of the mansion. Her eyes darted nervously to the hallway every time she heard a footstep, but Ravi was always asleep, oblivious to her growing fear. One morning, after a particularly restless night, Maya stepped into the garden, hoping to clear her mind. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long golden shadows across the overgrown lawn. But as she walked through the garden, she froze. Scrawled in the dirt, just beside the hedgerow, were strange symbols, 3 circles, one overlapping the other, drawn with what looked like dark, wet earth. Her heart skipped a beat. She looked around, but there was no sign of anyone who might have left the marks. No footprints. Just those symbols. Ravi would dismiss it, of course. He always did. "Probably just kids messing around," he would say, trying to make light of it. But Maya knew something was wrong. Later that day, as the sun began to set, a letter appeared on their doorstep. No return address. Just an old envelope, the edges frayed as though it had been handled many times. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the ink smeared as if written in haste. "You've come to claim what was never meant for you. Leave now, before it's too late. The mansion will claim you, as it has claimed all who came before you." The words sent a chill through her, making her pulse quicken. She turned the paper over, but there was nothing Elsino's signature, no clue about who had left it. Ravi would scoff at her concerns. He had already been dismissing her growing anxiety, chalking everything up to stress, to her imagination running wild. But the unease in her chest only deepened. Maya had learned to trust her instincts, and they were screaming at her now, warning her that something dark was happening at GIPSY'S ACRE. That night, as they lay in bed, the silence of the house felt more oppressive than ever. Ravi had finally fallen asleep beside her, but Maya couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time she closed her eyes, the strange symbols from the garden flashed in her mind, their meaning eluding her, yet their presence unmistakable. And then came the footsteps again, soft at first, then louder, as though someone was walking slow, deliberate through the dark hallway outside their bedroom door. Her breath caught in her throat. She turned to Ravi, but he remained asleep, oblivious to the sounds. She could hear the steps getting closer, closer to their room. Should I wake him? Her mind raced, her body frozen with fear. What if it's just the house settling? What if it's something else, something worse? Should I wake him? Her mind raced, her body frozen with fear. What if it's just the house settling? What if it's something else, something worse? A faint tapping sound echoed at the door. Not the wind, not the house settling. This was different. Her hand trembled as she reached for Ravi's shoulder, shaking him gently. Ravi, Ravi, wake up. But before he could stir, the door creaked open on its own, and the cold air swept into the room like a chill from the grave. Cliffhanger ending. Maya gasped, her heart hammering in her chest as she stared into the darkened doorway. There was no one there, no intruder. But the air was thick with something unnatural, something that made her stomach twist. A soft whisper drifted through the room, so faint, it could have been a figment of her imagination. Leave now, before it's too late. Before she could say another word, the door slammed shut, cutting her off, leaving them both in complete darkness. The suspects. Secrets of the past. Twists begin. The village near GIPSY'S Acre was small, its cobblestone streets winding through a haze of fog that never quite lifted. As Ravi ventured into town, trying to make sense of the strange happenings in the mansion, the villagers' reactions were as unsettling as the house itself. Their eyes would dart nervously when the topic of GIPSY'S ACRE came up, their words faltering as if they were afraid to speak of it aloud. Ravi had come to meet Arya, a local historian who had promised to shed light on the land's murky past. She was young, but there was an air of wisdom in her eyes that belied her age. She led him to the old town library, where ancient scrolls and dusty books lined the shelves like forgotten memories. Many don't speak of GIPSY'S Acre, Arya began, her voice low, almost as if she feared being overheard. She ran her fingers over a thick leather-bound book before pulling it from the shelf. But the truth is in the past, whether they like it or not. As Arya flipped through the pages, Ravi leaned in, watching her intently. The history of GIPSY'S Acre was darker than he had imagined. Centuries ago, the land had been cursed by a powerful sorcerer after a betrayal that ran deep within the roots of the village. The curse was said to claim the lives of all who dared to take ownership of the estate, ensuring that the mansion would never be free of its tragic past. The curse seemed to stretch over generations, with every heir meeting a fate worse than the last. Ravi felt a cold shiver run down his spine as he read the words. Could this be the reason for all the strange occurrences? Was it possible that he had inherited not just the mansion but its terrible history? But Arya's gaze turned steely as she closed the book, making him wonder if there was more she wasn't telling him. "I've seen too many people come here thinking they can ignore the curse," she said softly, almost as if speaking to herself, "but it never lets go." Before Ravi could ask more, a voice interrupted their conversation. It was Raji's childhood friend, standing in the doorway with an easy grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. Raj had been in town for the past few days, visiting Ravi and offering help with the renovations. But Ravi noticed something odd about his behavior, an intense curiosity about the mansion's past that seemed unnatural. "Didn't know you were here, Arya," Raj said smoothly, walking into the room. His eyes flickered to the book in Ravi's hands. The history of GIPSY'S Acre, huh? Fascinating stuff. Ravi narrowed his gaze, sensing a tension between his friend and the historian. Something didn't sit right with him. Was Raj simply interested in the history of the land, or was there something more? Before he could probe further, a soft knock at the door interrupted them. It was Nisha, a woman from the village who had an unsettling aura about her. She had once worked at the estate years ago, and it was said that she had a mysterious connection to the land. "Ravi," she said quietly, her voice tinged with something that felt like regret. "I didn't want to come, but I think you need to know about the estate's history. Some things have been hidden for far too long." She hesitated before stepping inside. Her dark eyes were filled with an unsettling sorrow as she spoke of the old house, her words haunted by past memories. "I grew up here. My family once worked for the owners, and we knew the stories, the ones they never tell you." Her gaze locked with Ravi's. "You should leave, before it's too late. Some things never leave. Not the house, not the people. Ravi felt his heart pound in his chest. Was she trying to warn him? Or was she part of the same tangled web of secrets that seemed to surround Gypsy's Acre? But before he could press her for more answers, there was another knock this time, more forceful. "Inspector Varun," came the voice from the other side of the door. Ravi opened the door to find a tall man standing in the doorway, his sharp eyes scrutinizing everything in sight. Inspector Varun was known in the village for his quiet demeanor and keen investigative mind, but Ravi could see the weight of suspicion in his gaze. "I've been following the strange occurrences around Gypsy's Acre," Inspector Varun said flatly, his tone serious. "People have been talking. Some are afraid, others think it's all coincidence, but I'm not so sure." Ravi's chest tightened. Was he finally going to get some answers, or was this just another person trying to push him into believing in ghosts and curses? "Ravi," the inspector continued, his eyes narrowing, "there's something you don't know. The history of this place isn't just folklore. It's the key to understanding what's happening to you and your fiancé." Ravi's mind raced. What was he not being told? Was it possible that the house was affecting them in ways they couldn't understand? Was someone trying to manipulate him into thinking there was more to the curse than there really was? As the group gathered, a sense of unease washed over Ravi. Raj's interest in the mansion was no longer innocent. Nisha's warning felt too real, too urgent. And Inspector Varun's presence in the room now felt as though he was just as trapped as Ravi in the mansion's dark history. Tension filled the air like a thick fog. Everyone had a part to play, but who could Ravi trust? Cliffhanger ending. The air was thick with anticipation. Just as Ravi was about to demand the truth, a loud bang echoed from inside the mansion, so sudden and deafening that it made everyone jump. The ground seemed to tremble beneath their feet, and the lights flickered violently. "Ravi!" Maya's voice rang out from inside the house. Without thinking, Ravi rushed toward the door, his heart racing. Was this just another strange occurrence, or had something more sinister finally come to the surface? As he stepped over the threshold, the door slammed shut behind him, leaving the others in the cold, silent air. What waited for Ravi in the darkness of Gypsy's Acre? And was he walking right into the trap that had claimed everyone who came before him? The midpoint dark secrets unfold. The days following the strange occurrences at Gypsy's Acre blurred into one another, each more unnerving than the last. Ravi felt it, the weight of something ancient pressing down on him, suffocating the life he once dreamed of building here. The mansion, despite the renovations, still held a sinister aura, its old walls whispering secrets that weren't meant to be uncovered. He'd been drawn to a small hidden alcove behind one of the crumbling walls in the east wing. The space was so tight, Ravi hadn't noticed it before. He ran his fingers along the rough stone, feeling for any sign of a concealed passage or object. And then he found it, an old, dust-covered diary. The leather binding was cracked with age, and the pages yellowed, yet the ink was still legible. Ravi's heart hammered as he began reading. The entries were chilling. They spoke of a series of unsolved deaths stretching back decades, all tied to the very land beneath his feet. The diary belonged to Eleanor Hartley, the last known resident of Gypsy's Acre. Her writing grew more frantic as she described a strange presence that seemed to haunt the estate, one that lurked just beyond the reach of light, watching, waiting. Eleanor had been terrified, but what unsettled Ravi the most was her final entry. "The curse is real. It's not the house that wants me, it's the land. It feeds on grief and regret. And soon, it will take someone else." Ravi's hand shook as he closed the book. The weight of her words pressed on him like an iron vice. Could it be possible? Had he truly inherited not just a mansion, but the death and suffering that came with it? He tried to push the thoughts away, but the nightmares began soon after. At first they were subtle, a fleeting shadow at the corner of his vision, a cold breath on the back of his neck. But as the days passed, the dreams grew more vivid, more violent. He would wake in a cold sweat, his heart racing, only to hear the soft creak of the floorboards beneath his feet, as if someone was walking in the halls, just out of sight. Each night, he would look at Maya and wonder, is she hearing them too? But something was wrong with Maya. Ravi noticed the change in her. She became withdrawn, her once bright eyes clouded with fear, her voice barely a whisper. She stopped exploring the mansion with him, choosing instead to stay locked in their room, staring out of the window with a distant, hollow gaze. Her behavior was unlike anything Ravi had ever seen. She was slipping away from him, as if the very curse he was beginning to believe in had already taken hold of her. He wanted to help, to comfort her, but she was unreachable. Then, one morning, everything took a turn for the worse. Ravi was in the kitchen when he heard a scream, a blood-curdling cry that sent chills down his spine. He rushed toward the sound, his heart pounding in his chest, and found Maya lying unconscious on the cold marble floor of the living room. Her body was stiff, her face pale as death, and clutched tightly in her hand was an old photograph. The picture was faded, the edges torn, but the face of the woman in it was unmistakable. It was Eleanor Hartleith, very same woman whose diary Ravi had read just days before. The photograph sent a surge of panic through Ravi's veins. How had Maya come to possess it? She had never seen the diary. She had never even mentioned Eleanor's name. Ravi's mind raced as he knelt beside her. He could hear her shallow breaths, but she wasn't waking. The silence that followed was deafening, as if the house itself had fallen still, waiting. He could feel the heavy presence of the curse pressing on him now, but something was more unsettling than that, something deeper. Why had Maya collapsed like this? Was it the curse that had claimed her, or had something more sinister taken hold? With trembling hands, Ravi looked at the photograph again. There was something about the woman's eye, something hauntingly familiar. He couldn't place it, but he knew, deep down, that the answers he sought were tangled within the past. Suddenly, Ravi's mind flashed to a memory, one that seemed too far away to be real. Raj, his childhood friend. Why had he been so eager to know about the mansion's history? Why had he never questioned the oddities surrounding GIPSY'S ACRE? Could he have known more than he let on? Was he somehow involved in what was happening to Maya and to him? The pieces were starting to fit together, but Ravi didn't know who to trust anymore. The once clear boundaries between friend and foe were starting to blur. And in the pit of his stomach, Ravi knew that he was no longer just a man trapped by a curse. He was caught in something far more dangerous, something far more personal. Cliffhanger ending. As Ravi carefully placed the photograph beside Maya, he heard a creak from the floor above, the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Slow, methodical, heavy. Someone was in the house. His heart stopped. Maya was still unconscious, and the others were nowhere in sight. Ravi grabbed the nearest object for protection, a candle holder, and made his way cautiously toward the stairs. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they were right above him. He looked up, his breath caught in his throat. At the top of the stairs stood Raji's, eyes wide, with an expression Ravi had never seen before. Fear, guilt, something darker. Ravi. Raj's voice trembled. You don't know what you're dealing with. The final act, the chase for the truth. The once quiet halls of GIPSY'S ACRE now felt like a labyrinth of deceit, shadows, and secrets. Ravi's every step echoed through the mansion as he paced, his mind racing to connect the last elusive pieces of the puzzle. Something was wrong, something deeper than the curse, something sinister that had been hidden within these walls for generations. His hands trembled as he clutched the old diary once again, reading the cryptic last lines he'd missed before. But it was no longer just about uncovering the past. It was about survival. As Ravi moved through the mansion, a chill settled in the air. The walls seemed to press in around him, their history whispering through the cracks, urging him to turn back, to abandon the house and the woman he loved. But Ravi wouldn't. Not when he knew what was at stake. It wasn't just the curse. Suddenly his phone rang. It was Inspector Varun. Ravi's chest tightened. Varun had been digging into the mansion's past too. His voice was frantic, a sharp contrast to the calm demeanor he usually carried. Ravi, you need to listen to me. The curse. It's a cover. There's something much darker going on here. The deaths, the disappearances, they're all tied to something buried deep within the walls of GIPSY'S ACRE. Smuggling, and a treasure. Ravi's breath caught. Smuggling, a treasure. Varun continued. The people who've died weren't just victims of some old superstition. There's an underground network that's been using this mansion for years. But that's not the worst part. The treasure, it's a vast fortune hidden right here. And it's been the cause of betrayal, lies, and murder for generations. Ravi barely processed the words. He had always suspected something was off about this place. But smuggling a treasure, it didn't make sense. He wanted to ask more questions. But the line went dead. A cold silence filled the air. Without a moment's hesitation, Ravi ran to the mansion's east wing, where he had felt the most strange presence. Something inside him told him that the answers lay there. But as Ravi moved down the darkened hallway, a sound echoed in the distance, a faint, distant scream. It was Maya. His heart skipped a beat. It was coming from the cellar. Without thinking, Ravi bolted toward the stairs, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The cellar door creaked open, and a wave of cold air hit him, as if the mansion itself was trying to keep him away. At the foot of the stairs, Ravi froze. Maya's figure was standing in the dim light, her back to him. But something was terribly wrong. Her posture was rigid, unnatural, and she was holding something in her hand, something glimmering in the shadows. "Maya," Ravi called out, his voice shaky, but his resolve firm. She turned slowly, her face pale, her eyes wide with terror. But there was something else, a flicker of recognition, something that was out of place. "Maya, what's going on? Why are you here?" Ravi demanded, his voice urgent. But before she could answer, a shadow loomed behind her, tall and menacing. Ravi's blood ran cold as the figure stepped forward. "Raj." "Maya, no," Ravi shouted, but it was too late. Raj lunged forward, grabbing Maya and pulling her away from the light. The glint in Maya's hand was revealed. It was a small, intricate key. "Maya, give me the key," Ravi screamed, but Maya seemed to hesitate. Her expression flickered, as if something was tugging at her from the past. The curse, the treasure, the dark secrets that ran deeper than he ever realized. But then, everything shifted. Raj pushed Maya toward a stone wall in the cellar and pressed her hand against it. The wall moved, revealing a hidden compartment. A safe. Ravi's eyes widened. The treasure, the one Varun had spoken of. It was real. But as he rushed forward, an explosion of light filled the room, blinding him. The mansion seemed to tremble as a new sound emerged, the creak of wood, followed by a slow, deliberate click. The cellar door slammed shut, trapping Ravi inside. As Ravi stumbled backward, the realization hit him like a physical blow. It wasn't just Maya's life at stake. There were others involved, hidden players who had been orchestrating everything from the shadows. With his heart pounding in his chest, Ravi's thoughts raced. Why had Raj and Maya been acting so strangely? What was her true connection to the mansion, to the treasure? Was she even the same person he'd fallen in love with? A deafening silence followed as Ravi struggled to find an escape. His eyes were locked on the hidden compartment, the safe that held the answers. The truth, the key to everything. But before he could make another move, he heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy, slow, deliberate. Someone was coming. Someone else. As the footsteps grew louder, Ravi could feel the weight of the walls closing in on him. Was this it? Was this the end of his search? Or was the next chapter just beginning? Cliffhanger ending. Suddenly, the door to the cellar flew open. Standing in the doorway was Inspector Varun, but his expression was not one of relief or rescue. His eyes were cold, calculating. "I was hoping you'd find the safe, Ravi. Now, let's see if you can survive long enough to understand what's really going on." The climax. The shocking revelation. The grand hall of GIPSY'S ACRE stood eerily silent, its high ceilings casting long shadows that stretched like the fingers of a forgotten past. The storm outside raged louder, its fury against the windows a fitting soundtrack for the storm brewing inside the mansion. Ravi stood at the center, his eyes scanning the faces of the suspects gathered around him: Raj, Arya, and Nisha. The air between them was thick with tension, each one harboring secrets that had been carefully hidden for too long. Ravi's heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing with the pieces of the puzzle that had finally clicked into place. The curse, the deaths, the strange happenings, they were all a distraction. A ruse. The real conspiracy had always been far darker, more intricate than he ever imagined. He had trusted them all, each in their own way. But now, the truth was about to come crashing down. "It was you all along, wasn't it?" Ravi's voice cut through the silence, a dangerous calm in his tone. His eyes locked onto Raj, then moved to Arya and Nisha. "You knew what was hidden here. The treasure, the wealth, the history." Raj shifted uneasily, but didn't respond. Arya's face remained inscrutable, but her eyes flickered for a fraction of a second. Guilt, fear, recognition. Nisha's lips tightened, her posture stiffening. They all knew the game was up. Ravi took a step forward, his gaze now piercing through each of them. "The curse was just a cover lie to keep people away while you all schemed behind the scenes. The deaths, they weren't accidents. They were part of a plan, a conspiracy to claim what's buried here." The words hung in the air, heavy with accusation. For a moment, no one spoke. The mansion seemed to hold its breath. Ravi's mind raced back to every detail, every twist. His nights of restless sleep, his growing unease, all leading to this moment. Arya's voice finally broke the silence, her tone low, almost regretful. "It was never meant to go this far, Ravi. We didn't think anyone would dig deep enough." "You knew about the treasure?" Ravi demanded. His eyes flashed with anger. "How much did you know, and why involve Nisha?" Nisha flinched at the mention of her name, her face momentarily betraying her guilt. She glanced at Arya, a fleeting look of betrayal passing between them. "I didn't have a choice," Nisha whispered, her voice trembling. "When I was young, I was involved with the estate. I was part of the plans before they went wrong. I had to play my part to survive. I didn't want this." Ravi's stomach churned. Every word revealed a new layer of deception, one that made him question everything he thought he knew. He had trusted them, but now everything was a lie. A low growl of thunder rumbled through the mansion, but it was nothing compared to the sound of Ravi's heart breaking. How could he have been so blind? "And what about you, Raj?" Ravi's voice grew colder. "You've been here all along, but you never once warned me. You've been poking around, asking questions. Why?" Raj hesitated, then let out a long sigh. "I wanted the treasure. But so did Arya and Nisha." His eyes flicked to them. It wasn't just about the money. It was about power. Ravi's mind reeled as the final pieces fell into place. They had all come for the treasure, the hidden fortune buried deep beneath the mansion, the wealth tied to the estate's dark history. But someone else, someone Ravi had trusted the most, had orchestrated it all from the start. And that's when it hit him, the mastermind behind everything. His heart skipped a beat. "You?" Ravi turned slowly, his eyes widening in disbelief. His voice faltered as he uttered the name. "You've been behind it all, haven't you?" Arya's lips curled into a cold, calculating smile. But it was the look in her eyes that struck Ravi like a slap to the face. It wasn't just that she knew about the treasure, it was that she had planned everything from the beginning. The deaths, the curse, the lies. Arya stepped forward, her posture regal, almost mocking. "You never suspected me, did you, Ravi? You thought you knew me, thought I was your ally, your friend. But the truth is, I've been here long before you. I know what the mansion holds, and I know how to claim it." Ravi's legs weakened, and his breath caught in his throat. He had trusted her. He had believed in her. And now, everything was crashing down. "I had to deceive you, Ravi," Arya continued, her voice cold and almost tender. "You were just a pawn, a means to an end. I had to make sure you dug up the past, had to make sure you would lead me to it." The realization hit like a freight train. Arya had been the one pulling the strings, the one orchestrating the chaos, manipulating everyone around her. But why? What was it that made her so determined to claim the treasure? Before Ravi could ask, a loud crash echoed through the hall. The ground trembled beneath their feet as a section of the wall shifted. Dust fell from the ceiling, and a secret compartment revealed itself. Inside was a chest, the treasure. But as Ravi moved toward it, a cold, deadly laugh echoed through the hall, and Arya stepped back into the shadows. "Go ahead." she whispered, her voice dripping with malice. "Claim your prize. But remember, nothing comes without a cost." Ravi's fingers hovered over the chest, but his thoughts were consumed by one chilling question. What was the true cost of unearthing this dark past? In that moment, everything around him shifted. The mansion felt alive with an unnatural energy, a power that had been waiting for this very moment. The walls groaned, as if mourning the revelation, and Ravi felt the floor beneath him tremble. As his hand reached for the chest, a sudden, violent noise ripped through the hall. The lights flickered and went out. Darkness consumed them all. Then, a scream. Ravi spun around, his breath stolen by the cold grip of terror. Maya. Cliffhanger ending. In the inky blackness, a shadow lunged toward him. Was the curse
the
real?
last thing Ravi heard
Or was it a
the sound of
mastermind's
footsteps?
Comment
Then
below.
nothing.